Hello, dog lovers, and welcome to this week's episode of Dear Dog Fanatic. I'm your host, Kirsten, but you can call me Kay. I am a dog mom of 3, and I operate a virtual dog training company called The Canine Detective. So this week's stories are from the Am I the A-hole subreddit, the theme being dog poop drama. Our first story is from Reddit user No Establishment 2, and it is titled, Am I the A-hole if I drop off a note and baked goods to my neighbor who made me pick up somebody else's dog poop? And why I thought this theme would be very fitting, apropos. I was inspired by my partner who went to take our dogs off for a run this morning, and him mentioning that, he always brings extra poop bags. We have 3 dogs, and he'll pick up not only our dog's poop, but other people's dog poop. Because obviously he's the guy around our neighborhood walking 3 dogs, and he doesn't want people to think that it's him that doesn't pick up the dog poop. We always pick up our dog poop. In my opinion, there's no excuse to not pick up dog poop. A variety of reasons for this, and we will get into the drama that ensues when people don't in these Reddit stories today. So the first story is from user No Establishment 211. And am I the a-hole if I drop off a note and baked goods to my neighbor who made me pick up somebody else's dog poop? So we'll get into the story, read some comments, and then the fun thing about the Am I the a-hole subreddit is that users do vote on whether or not OP is the a-hole or not. So we will see what everyone says. The story starts off with my SO, significant other, male 33, and I, female 32, moved into a new area. I'm careful about my dog going potty on lawns. I always, and this is in all caps, always, pick it up and bring extra bags. Tonight, on our walk, our dog went potty immediately, picked it up, looped it around back towards our house from the other direction. Close to home, he sniffed another dog's poo, and we kept going. We're at our door when I hear somebody running up behind us, startling us. A guy is coming at us with, "Your dog pooped on my lawn. You need to pick it up." I say, calmly, "I know for a fact that didn't happen. You've got the wrong dog." He insists it just happened. He saw it and has it on camera. I say, "Let's see the footage because I'm positive." My significant other didn't want it to escalate, so he says, "Let's go take a look." Neighbor puts his hand on my SO's back and pushes him towards his house. They are of similar cultural backgrounds, so maybe okay, but I didn't like it. I look down and see I have our bag in my hand and yell ahead to them. They didn't hear me, or my SO didn't want me to get involved. I take a breath, drop off the dog, and head back. Immediately, I am like, as a female, no, I wouldn't go back. Let my partner handle this, mostly because it depends on how open people are to conversing. But just starting off this story, the way that the neighbor is running after you, asking you to pick up dog poop, this seems like a somewhat volatile individual, at the very least unlikely to being open to conversing and negotiating and to a point of view that does not match their own, especially since you already told them, like, no, like that for sure didn't happen. Let's see the footage. So I wouldn't have gone back, but we'll see how that turns out for her, just because OP is female. So she heads back. If by some miracle my dog had gone without me noticing, I would apologize and pick it up. Neighbor shows me over to where it is and points to the poo in question. I shine my light. This is happening at night. I shine my light and I can't help but literally start laughing out loud. Every ounce of diplomacy failed at that moment. It was white, dry, hard as a rock, and tiny. Obviously been sitting there for a long time, and where I saw my dog smelling it. I said incredulously, "That's not my dog's poop. Can't you see how hard it is? It's old." He answers, "I'm not here to argue with you. Just pick it up." See, this is where I feel like that this is a huge amount of entitlement for the neighbor. I understand how frustrating it can be to live in a neighborhood when people just aren't picking up their dog poop. We have dogs, and we are exacerbated by people pooping not on our lawn, on other people's lawn, and not picking it up. So I understand the frustration for the neighbor. I just think that there's a certain level of audacity and entitlement that one would have to chase somebody down. Let's give this neighbor grace, the guy, let's give the neighbor grace in this moment to think maybe he truly believed that it was OP's dog that pooped on his lawn. Okay, maybe he was very upset, goes to chase them down. But when the footage showed that it wasn't OP's dog, when OP had a poop bag showing, oh, this is my dog's poop, which don't get me wrong, dogs can poop more than once on a walk, but somebody that picked up their dog's poop once is likely to pick up their dog's poop again. So he's not believing her on a second count. Third, and maybe this guy doesn't know much about dogs, I would venture to say that is the case, the neighbor, because yeah, absolutely, if the dog poop is hard, that's not a new poop. But the audacity to insist that somebody else pick up poop that isn't their dog's poop. And I know that he's just has it in his mind that this is like their dog's poop, so it's their problem. But he's being very insistent that it's not. And because he has no evidence otherwise, I don't understand why he's still insisting that she picks up the poop. Is this some weird, like, her trip? Is this he's just at the end of his rope? Yeah, I would be uncomfortable living in a neighborhood with somebody who, it's one thing to have these opinions and keep it to yourself. It's quite another. This is like a man who will chase you down the street. It's just quite odd and quite, yeah, it doesn't make for a good dynamic. I would feel a little bit unsafe, especially since like it's nighttime, and I'm assuming it's nighttime because like they had to shine a light to even see the dog poop. So there's this strange man running after this woman. Thank goodness her partner was there with her, but there's this guy running after this woman in the dark. It's just an uncomfortable situation. I just would not want to be in that situation. Yeah, so the neighbor's insisting that OP picks up the dog poop. OP says, now I'm pissed. I know my SO hates it when I argue with people, but I have a strong respect complex. Yeah, and this is what the issue really is at the core is the respect. He's feeling disrespected because somebody in his neighborhood pooped on his lawn and didn't pick it up. Fair. But then he is exacerbating the impact of that disrespect by directing his anger towards a completely unrelated party. And so that's, in my mind, that's where the neighbor loses the moral high ground. Yeah. So OP looks at this neighbor dead in the face as I scoop up the poop and say, funny how you don't want to argue, but you make me pick up somebody else's dog poop. Where's the camera footage? I would love to see it. Then my SO hurries me away towards home. I also don't like the SO in this situation. The SO gave the neighbor, more respect than what was due. You're the one who is the SO. He is wanting to be passive to avoid conflict, but then you're still watching your SO, who is totally fine with standing up for truth in this moment. She's the one picking up the dog poop? No, dude, like if you're going to put her in this situation, you should be the one picking up the dog poop. I'm not a fan of the lack of respect, but lack of like support for one's partner with a strange man in your new neighborhood. It's not a good look for the SO. SO tells OP, he tells me we should be the bigger people and reminds me that there's so many bigger things in life. Says he also laughed, told him it was super old and made it clear we didn't do it. I told him, you must be having a hard time with this issue if you're literally having to run after people. I'm sorry this happens to you so much. SO doesn't let things like this get to him and always feels bad for the out-of-line person. I often feel the need to correct them. In the grand scheme of things, it's just a piece of poop, but the principle is what gets me. Now here's where I might be the a-hole. I'm considering baking him treats and dropping them off with a note saying, I'm the bigger person. We got off on the wrong foot. But you're still totally wrong, and I'm not the one. My SO thinks it isn't necessary, and we should ignore him. I'm not trying to start anything bigger, but I'm also not a doormat. So Reddit, am I the a-hole if I dropped off a note and baked goods to my neighbor who made me pick up somebody else's dog poop? That is passive-aggressive. That, in my mind, is just inviting more drama, more chaos into your life. I just would not want to do that myself. I think that would get you in trouble. I think I just don't want to be in this moment. You have the moral high ground. If you do this in effectively retaliation, OP no longer has the moral high ground, in my opinion. But let's see what some comments say. So this will age well. Says, I was with you all the way up until the baking cookies bit. Offering home-baked cookies is a gesture to say congratulations or happy birthday or welcome to the neighborhood or thank you or I'm so sorry or simply a thing you do for someone you would like to know better. The note you plan to attach to your cookies show that you intend it to convey none of these things. If the note merely said, "We got off on the wrong foot, here are some cookies," and left it at that, I wouldn't be calling you an a-hole. But the rest of your note shows that you're offering cookies merely to convey the message, I'm right and you're wrong. I'm a better person than you. What do you hope to achieve from this note? He's not going to suddenly feel warmly towards you or concede that he was wrong. He's gloating, and he will know that you're gloating. You can feel as smug as you like about his wrongness, but keep it to yourself. Your SO is right. You're trying to escalate the conflict when there's no need. You're the a-hole. Hard Knock Sam replies to that, saying, "Yep, I was totally on OP's side until the note and baked goods. She says she's not trying to start anything bigger, but precisely that is what she is doing." Wes Morgan 1 replies to the "I'm not trying to start anything bigger" and says, "Yes, you are, because you're trying to get the last word. It's as if you want to start a feud. Let it go. You would be the a-hole," as in, like, if OP delivered the cookies, she would be the a-hole for that act. Binger 5 says, "Don't do it. No need to get in the last word." This also has "Eat My Poop" from The Help, which is a fantastic movie. If you haven't watched it, go see it. Written all over it. The reference is, I'm like, do I spoil? There may be some poop involved in baking at some point during the show. And that immediately was my conclusion, particularly because in this scenario, there was a fight about poop. My brain immediately would go, like, is there something unsanitary in these baked goods? And I Just Read a Lot says, "Don't send the note. Consider why you decided to pick up the poop anyway. You were free to walk away. If your SO wanted to pick it up to keep the peace, that's on him. But you should just let him do it." Yeah, and this is what I was saying. If something about your relationship made you pick up the poop so as to not have conflict at home, then you might want to think seriously about what's going on in your relationship. Yeah, and I would agree with that. Oh, okay, and I'm going to read this comment because this is OP responding to that one. And OP says, "About 12 hours after it happened, this is what I realized too. I wasn't just upset with the neighbor, but honestly also my husband, because I felt he didn't stand up enough for us and almost took my neighbor's side. We had a really good talk about it, and he admitted I shouldn't have even been involved at all. And he didn't feel he fully handled the situation properly." Okay, so growth from the husband. "He tried to keep me out of it, but I kind of inserted myself, as I tend to do in these situations, so he panicked and just let it unfold while trying not to let it escalate more, plus get me away as soon as possible." Okay, so the husband's not completely clueless. He does realize that this is a potentially dangerous situation for OP to be in. OP continues and says, "I didn't have enough characters to fully explain, but he didn't want me following it all to begin with, but had to come back for the bag. Which at that point, I was mad he was coming back for a bag that he should never have agreed to use in my book. I know I probably sound like a Karen, but it's not like that. I'm usually very agreeable until someone does something that is disrespectful. If it were me, I wouldn't have picked it up because of how the man handled it. If he had been kinder or more open to talk, we could have come to an understanding. If it was my husband, he would have picked it up no matter how the other person acted, just to end the issue there. Just truly a difference of opinions, and I think what makes us a great couple because we challenge and learn from each other in these situations. Although sometimes those can be hard truths. Usually it's him teaching me to cool down and me teaching him to stand up for himself more." Okay, and I'm glad. It seems like OP is happy with their situation, and at least they know what to do about it going forward. The next story in our episode today is from the Rad Texan. It is titled, "Am I the a-hole for letting my dogs pee outside?" I live in a quiet neighborhood on the edge of a major U.S. city. I walk my dogs around the neighborhood multiple times a day, and I have met many other dog-owning neighbors in the last 3 years of living here. Today, while on a much longer walk, translation, we were walking on a street we don't frequent as often. My dogs, a 10-pound Pomeranian and a 15-pound Chihuahua mix, peed on the edge of somebody's yard, and the person who lives there yelled at me for it. He said, "Could you please not do that?" in an outraged tone. I simply said, "Okay," and started to walk away. He then followed up with, "It's rude for them to pee all over my yard." I immediately asked, "It's rude for my dogs to pee outside. Dear reader, they were on the edge of the property line, didn't kick and didn't poop, which I always pick up to the best of my ability. I don't like the best of my ability line, but we'll go on. I almost asked him how he keeps wild animals from peeing in his yard, but I was more interested in finishing our walk before the impending rain rolled through. Nothing else was said during this exchange, or at least not that I could hear since I was already walking away. What he didn't know is that we are a few streets away from where we started their walk. So their peeing was more lifting their legs and hoping a drop come out to mark their territory. I always keep my dogs on a leash. I carry at least one full roll of poop bags. Both leashes have poop bags, and one leash has a little holder for the used poop bags. Love that. Sounds like responsible dog parenting to me. I don't let them in the street or into a yard that has any animal-human deterrent, fencing, landscaping, etc. And I always say hi to everyone I see. Am I missing something deeper here? He doesn't have any animal deterrents, such as a fence or small garden fence, those smaller ones that indicate you shouldn't walk through that section. No signs, no ultrasonic machines. So am I the a-hole for letting my dogs pee on the edge of the yard in a residential neighborhood? I'm interested to see what the comments say, because I don't think that this user is the a-hole. Now, knowing that is that neighbor's preference, the user would be the a-hole if they let their dogs pee in that neighbor's yard again. But as OP said, there was no, and we see this very common, at least where I live, in residential neighborhoods, the ultrasonic device that he's talking about, they stick it in the ground and it makes this pinging noise. It kind of hurts my head, honestly, when I walk by it, but it's so dogs can hear it. It makes them uncomfortable so they don't go pee in the yard, or that's the idea behind these devices. It's also very common for people to stick little signs in their lawns saying, don't let your dog defecate in my yard. And I think that is kind of the best solution, is if you don't want animals to defecate in your yard, put up that little sign. If people are going to make the argument, which I can also see the logic in, that is somebody's private property, and so therefore you shouldn't do that, this becomes an interesting issue, and this becomes especially interesting when it comes to city planning. And I can go off on a major tangent for those that don't know. In university, I studied both business and sustainable development. A lot of the people that got my degree went on to pursue masters in urban planning and working for the city and different things like this. So when I see things like this, a lot of people be like, oh, it's this neighbor versus this neighbor, common spaces versus private spaces and things like this, depending on where people are in the world. And I do confess that while I have some notions in my head of like what a major city in Texas looks like, I myself have not traveled there, so I can't say whether or not my assertions are correct. But we see this in a lot of urbanized spaces where there's not a lot of third spaces, not sufficient parks, things like this. Where I'm going with this is, if we made it a general rule that in polite society, in a world where we were respecting of our neighbors, we could implement a rule, hypothetically, a moral rule. I'm also kind of a moral philosophy nerd, but that's a story for another time. But say we, as a hypothetical, implemented a rule that said, okay, you're not allowed to potty your dog on somebody else's property. Where does the property start and end? Depending on where you are in urban spaces, some of the setbacks isn't actually your neighbor's property, it's actually the city. So that's its own other thing. What is our proposed alternative? Are we saying as a society that we should be having our dogs go to the bathroom inside the house instead? There are tools to use for that. You could set your dog up for their own doggy toilet station in the bathroom. Is that what we're proposing as a society? Are we saying that as a consequence, we need to have mandated green stations or like dog potty stations in every neighborhood? Because if they aren't allowed to go potty on your grass, do you want them to go poop on the sidewalk? In practicality, where I'm living, I don't think that would be a great compromise, because a lot of people, even if people are picking up their dog poop, sometimes dog poop can be quite wet. So then do you want more dog poo on your shoes all the time because they're going to have to poop on the sidewalk? Same thing with the pee, right? So that, because you don't pick up dog pee when that happens. So if you live in a rainier place, maybe that's okay because it washes away. So I'll see what people end up saying in the comments, and maybe OP says something in the comments that makes them the a-hole. But in my mind, under the constraints that OP faces, what it means to like live in a city, and I think this is like suburban because they're talking about neighborhood and people having lawns. OP did the most responsible thing that they could given the circumstances they face. Now, again, if we want to implement different rules about what is the polite thing, the morally correct thing to do, we can have that conversation. But under our current circumstances, I think that this is like the most responsible way to go about doing it. In sustainable development, we can also get into the morality around, is having lawns even ethical? Is that a waste of green space? It speaks to classism and hierarchies with respect to why lawns were invented was a show of wealth from the bourgeoisie, the ruling classes, because it was very much so look, we can have all of this green space that I don't need to use for subsistence farming because I'm that rich. But not a lot of people know that, or it's not as common. So then if we get into the morality of it, of like, well, actually having the lawn in the first place isn't a very like responsible thing to do. The immorality of the having of the lawn does not justify somebody defecating on your lawn if you don't want them to. I'm just posing this as you might think that one neighbor has the moral high ground, depending on where you stand with how should we be using spaces. What does it mean to own land? What does that entitle somebody to do on said land? What does that mean in terms of access? And depending on what country you're living in, this has differences. My partner comes from Ireland. We're moving to Ireland later this year. And I was asking like, oh, like, you know, cutting across fields, or how does that work with the hedgerows? Is that part of somebody's property? Is that maintained by the country? And so like depending on where you live in the world, there are different rules of like what constitutes a property line and what you're allowed to use. Using this as an example, this might be the case in more rural places in Canada and the US. I just don't have that experience, so I don't have that frame of reference to speak from. But I know that my father-in-law is part of a hunting club where they have a group of hounds that chases foxes off of farmers' fields because obviously that impacts their crops and things like that. So then there are rules and agreements that different farmers get into with this hunting club of like, oh yes, you're allowed during these time to like hunt foxes away from my field. This is all my point of like access. You have Norway that have right to roam as a principle, so you're able to essentially camp in like most places. So different countries, different societies have different rules around what constitutes your land versus the public's land. Access rights, what you're allowed to use with said land. This is taking place in the US. And so let's read the comments. Jules Sherlock says, some dog pee can turn your yard brown and kill grass. I think it has to do with the pH levels in their urine. Try to keep them on the strip of grass between the sidewalk and the street. Yeah, so again, this is proposing that there is a strip of grass between the sidewalk and the street. And again, I would concur that if that is an option to you in your neighborhood, the like morally responsible thing to do would be to have your dog potty on that strip of grass. If there's no strip of grass present, I would think the next responsible thing to do would be to have them potty at the edge of somebody's yard rather than the sidewalk, because I don't think anyone wants to step in dog poop or urine. Like I said, even if you scrape it up. But please let me know in the comments, because I'm always very open to changing my opinion. Mystery S responds to that and says, plus then every other dog walking by wants to mark on top of it. And yeah, this is very true. Deleted user responds and says, sorry, you're the a-hole. Generally speaking, it's rude to let your dogs go to the bathroom on other people's property. You live in a neighborhood outside the city. You have a yard. Your dog should be going there before you take them on walks. Once you're marking, you should be correcting it. Keep them, I'm dog trainer red flag of like, what do you mean by correcting it? Keep them moving so they don't mark the property they don't own. Once the dog marks, half the dogs in the neighborhood are going to mark there. And yep, that can definitely be true. Salau Choud says, the guy doesn't want his plant sullied by your dog's pee and doesn't want wave after wave of dogs to cover up the data your dog's left behind and end up with plants that smell like pee or damaged by said fluid. As you know, not everyone likes dogs, or they might be cat people, or they've been bitten. They just can't tolerate dogs for some non-specific reason. Some people like me and love dogs, but do not appreciate the things that they do in the ordinary course of their day. They find the business that dogs undertake messy, unpleasant, unhygienic. You sound like a responsible dog owner who makes every reasonable effort to ensure that your dogs aren't a nuisance. That said, you cannot please everyone, and in spite of your best efforts, all dogs are rather liberal with their bodily fluids. Not the a-hole. At replacement 4828 says, obviously you're the a-hole. As a dog owner, I've never understood people feeling like this is okay. I'm very interested. Yeah, and the OP says, can you tell me why though? I genuinely want to learn and figure out a solution besides just avoiding this one house. Okay, so a lot of people are bringing up, again, it's like the property owner's right to like keep their place pristine. Speaking as somebody who's also been a dog walker and a dog boarder, and obviously I'm a dog trainer and I have dogs, so I've worked with dogs in a lot of different contexts. I'm like, okay, in solution mode, if we say that blanket rule, I'm not allowed to go potty on other people's lawns. We could put diapers on dogs so they like soil themselves while on walks. We could have public dog bathrooms. We could ban dogs. I'm not proposing any of those things necessarily. I'm an empathetic individual, but I'm also very much so solutions orientated. Like, okay, if we're going to say we can't do this, then you need to offer an alternative. Saying just no to something in a lot of cases is not helpful because you're not proposing a solution. So I'm just going to read through these comments because I'm very open to changing my mind too. And I'm like, where's the proposed solution? Okay, so Atlas 1506 says, gentle, you're the a-hole. I'm also a dog owner, but always keep my dogs beside me or only on the sidewalk until we are on public property or my own property. I just think it's kind of rude, and people who don't have dogs didn't sign up for it. Even if you're trying to get away with the technicality of part of their yard is city property, I just think it's being neighborly and kind. My dogs also have a release command to go sniff, so she knows not to just pee on random property. It's not that hard to train your dog if you put the time and effort into it. This is totally fair. I hope that this user is also then taking their dogs on like trail walks and things like that, because if you're only letting your dog sniff in your own property, I think that probably the neighborhood walks aren't sufficient in terms of, okay, there's the reason behind we do walks, right? Some of it's for exercise, some of it's for mental enrichment. If you're having your dog in like heel position beside you for the entire walk, that is not going to be satisfying enough for them, which is okay if you do other things for your dog to allow them to use their sniff, for allow them to have agency and choice in their life. But if you're a dog owner where your dog's really only experiencing the world through the context of the walk, I would be hesitant to say, don't let your dog sniff when you're walking around the neighborhood, which again, if we're going to implicate that as a moral rule, this is okay, but then we just need to come up with solutions. I have been looking for the thread around OPs genuinely asking, okay, like willing to take this feedback on board, so what else should I do instead? And people are saying, oh, like have your dog go in their own yard. And OP says, and this was going to be my thought, as I work with clients that live in apartments, live in basement suites, live in the countryside, live in the city, not everyone has their own yard. And this is the case for OP. OP says, unfortunately, I don't have my own yard. I live in an apartment complex and they do their main relief pee there. Our walks are for enrichment and bio needs. Do you own dogs that need walks for bio needs? If so, what have you done to train them to pee on sidewalks, not someone's yard? Genuinely asking so I can learn. Thanks. And OP was downvoted. I don't understand. Like, OP is trying, and I'm trying through OP to learn what people think the like responsible alternative is here. Somebody is calling him up on like, do you even live in that neighborhood because you live in an apartment? It's like, yeah, in urban spaces, there are houses and apartments in the same neighborhood, and they get a little bit in the weeds there with that one. Someone asks, is there grass at your complex? A little bit between parking lots, which is where they do the vast majority of their peeing. This instance was my dog lifting a leg and didn't miss a beat of our pace. And so I'll note myself out in response to this thread of OP asking, okay, like what should I do instead? And they say, yep, I own a dog now and have had at least one dog for the last 25 years. I walk her in our yard for her bio needs more than 90% of the time. She may occasionally relieve herself on walks in wooded public green space, but I would work to prevent her from going to somebody's yard. I generally don't give enough leash slack to let her go into the grass on other people's property, relieving herself or otherwise. This particular dog is also sort of weird, so she'll wait to get back to her own yard to pee at the end of a walk. I didn't teach her that, and I don't know if she's trying to mark her territory or just feel safer there. It's the latter. It's the feeling safer. That is actually one of the things that one can use as a trainer to benchmark a dog's improved confidence in public is when they're willing to go to the bathroom in public. If your dog isn't, it's possible that they're just not feeling confident enough to leave their scent because it's quite vulnerable to go to the bathroom. A lot of dogs might not feel comfortable enough to go to the bathroom outside of their yard due to confidence issues. You're kind of doing something weird here, presenting things like living in that particular apartment with a dog is just something that happened to you rather than reflecting choices on your part. Knowing where your dog was going to relieve itself is totally on you and should have been something you thought through either before getting the dog or before moving to that apartment. I will note, because I think you said your dog was a little, that pee pads are a thing and your dog can be trained to use them. Creating additional trash doesn't seem like a great idea to me, but that's better than just expecting people who live on your walking route to accept the fact to have to receive your dog's waste. There are some people who go back and forth in the comments saying that it's wild that some people are so against OP because they pick up their dog's poop. I don't know how to pronounce this commenter's username, but they say, wild that you think this, honestly. You pick up poops, you can't pick up pee. Peeing on the edge of somebody's yard is totally normal, not the a-hole. And someone responds to that, flat replacement for you. Only if you're an a-hole is this normal. There are all kinds of public property to take your dogs to pee. Not sure how. Don't damage other people's private property is a wild take. Someone responds to this saying, false, go live in the deep woods. Obviously, this is quite the controversial topic, which I did not anticipate when I started this. And I think this a lot of times has to do with where people are living, both just from expectations on what people believe is reasonable for a dog to do, but also what people think is reasonable when it comes to somebody's private property and what that means. I grew up in a place where it's respectful to pick up your dog's poop, that, dogs do pee on the edge of people's yards. It's not nice to let the dog go further into people's yards, but on the property line is okay unless signage is up because the dogs need to pee somewhere. There is not grass between the sidewalk and the road. Sometimes dogs just need to use the bathroom. Do you want the default to be that dogs pee and poo on the sidewalk? And I can understand that stance. In my mind, I think you're inconveniencing more people to have poop stains or pots of dog pee on the sidewalk that people are going to step through and end up on their shoes. Okay, well, this person was voted as the a-hole by most of the commenters. I found it particularly interesting, the debate in the comments, because for some of these, particularly the dog owners that are saying, oh, they don't let their dog do this. And I'm like, okay, if your dog isn't getting sniffy walks in your neighborhood, totally fine. I also think, and many dog trainers will agree, the walk around the neighborhood is often some of the most stressful and least fun kinds of walks for your dog. So if you are not going to let your dog do a sniffy walk around the neighborhood, then time to rent a sniff spot, trying to hit those forested trails, go to the beach, things like that. Make sure your dog is getting your enrichment elsewhere. I did not think dog pee would be this controversial. I understand the dog poop, but the pee one is a new one for me. Because and again, coming from the sustainable development background, I am a big proponent for protecting biodiversity spaces. So we'll have a lot of wetlands where certain aspects of the trails dogs won't be allowed to go into, or we have whole park of nature reserve areas where dogs aren't allowed. Again, just the defecation, but also just in terms of the dog sense and presence, spooking wildlife that calls that area their home. And I think that is the interesting thing for me is the end of result here is people have the right to do what they want with their property. I'm not saying that is not true. In terms of the greater collectivism for society, I think that actual wild spaces are more important than individual property, mostly because that will have a greater impact. One user was saying, essentially insinuating that you should not be taking your dog on neighborhood walks. You live in an apartment, so maybe you shouldn't have gotten a dog. I am not of that view. I know many pet owners living in apartments that can mate for great dog owners. I also think that's a slippery slope. If we're going to prescribe that you need to attain a certain level of wealth or status or circumstances to have a pet, are we going to extrapolate that and say that it's a similar situation for children? If yes and no, then that gets into classism issues of, okay, only certain individuals who have achieved a certain level of material wealth are morally superior enough, it's ethical enough for them to have dogs or children, offsprings, beings that they're caring for. And I take an issue with that, just from like a moral stance. Obviously, there's issues in terms of abuse and neglect, which neglect is a form of abuse when it comes to both animal rearing, like pet rearing, and child rearing. I don't think that it is acceptable for others to determine that somebody shouldn't be having an animal. I just think then you get into a lot of issues of people prescribing what other people should do with their lives. And that has implications that are far more reaching and extending than simply pet ownership. I also know most people don't take a systems approach to thinking when they're having these stances. Alrighty, here is the next one, which is related to our first story a little bit. This is from user SpareTip6703, who says, am I the a-hole for chasing someone down to stop letting their dog use my yard as a bathroom? This is why Reddit is also not the be-all, end-all authority, because I have not read this, but I see the judgment of a-hole immediately. And so I'm very interested because we've just had two stories. A story where somebody was saying, like, yeah, you shouldn't be letting somebody defecate in their yard, but now this person's the a-hole for chasing someone down for doing just that. So I think a lot of times it comes down to like who the responders, the commenters are on these things who are voting, because is these two sides of the same coin? No, but let's see. So OP says, I've 35 male, got a freshly remodeled front yard that looks really good. It's about a month old. Our old front yard was a grass yard. We regularly had issues with people letting their pets defecate on it. The poop was mostly picked up, but their yard reeked of pee when it was hot out. I put up a be respectful, no poop or pee signs, and they are still up post remodel. Finally, my wife and I bit the bullet to remodel the yard. Now the first 5 feet of the yard next to the sidewalk is rock, and we are hoping that would deter people from letting their dog in our yard. It doesn't seem like it has. It is still a noticeable issue to our noses. And again, this is where I can see a lot of people's points. I can see why this would be super distressing, why people would not want to have this. I do think if something was this much of an issue and this much of a challenge, I would be inclined to just put up a fence. That's rather self-explanatory, especially if you're going to go through this whole remodel process. Some people would say like, well, they shouldn't have to put up the fence. No, they shouldn't have to. This then goes back to the first story of, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? Of, are we going to argue with our neighbors? We can. Are we going to take the path of least resistance, picking up the dog poop, putting up a fence? Don't know. People will be like, no, you shouldn't have to do this. And then you flip the conversation for the reverse. And then the person is still the a-hole. So I also think that people just really like calling other people a-holes and believing that other people are in the wrong, but then not looking at their side of the fence, so to speak. But OP continues, this morning, my wife, 27 female, pointed out that someone, 30 female, letting their dog go to the bathroom in our yard. As soon as I saw this, I headed out the door, and by the time I got outside, she was in front of my neighbor's yard. I walked her way and yelled at her to not let her dog pee and poop in my yard. I pointed out the sign. She says if her dog has to go, her dog has to go. I don't like that response, and I will say, as a dog owner, if I see the signs, I won't let my dogs go on that property. I also won't let my dogs go on turf. So I do agree. I don't think that is super respectful. So the neighbor who let their dog go to the bathroom in OP's yard says, I don't know why you are complaining. I cleaned it up. And Opie says, not the pee. She was giving me a big attitude. I yelled at her to teach her dog to use the bathroom at home. She told me to shut up, a-hole, and called me a bully. As she continued walking away, I said, my yard is not for your dog. Am I the a-hole? I'm very curious in the comments what you think. Polite society rules for the humans of the respectful thing. In this scenario, an ideal conversation, the conversation would have been like this. Opie comes out and says, hey, like, my yard really stinks. Please don't let your dog go to the bathroom. Points to the sign. The person would say, oh, I'm so sorry. I won't let my dog go in your yard anymore. End scene. Roll the credits. Everybody was coming from a place of being willing to change and being open. But no, both of these people came into this situation very defensive, thinking the other person was in the wrong. And so they both acted like a-holes. Everyone sucks here, in my opinion. But we will see what the comments say, because again, I'm very curious why this person was voted the a-hole when, as we've seen the past 3 stories, people have very strong opinions about people going to the bathroom in yards. A deleted user says, put up a fence, problem solved, and you have better security. This is my thought. Not that I think that they should have to, but I'm just wondering if it's becoming so much of a problem, and if you're already spending money on the remodel, why not? Somebody responds to that saying many HOAs, which is homeowners associations, which seem to be a big problem in the US from some of these Reddit stories, but many HOAs don't allow fences in the front yard. It has to start at the front side of the house and goes along the side and back to the property only. Deleted user says, you silly Americans, I actually own my property and can put whatever I want on it. And this is what it goes back to, like, what does it mean to own a property? If you're in an HOA, do you own the property? If you theoretically own a property, but oftentimes you don't. Like, people think, I have the property so I can do whatever I want. But then you're going to have to talk to bylaw or your local municipality to get planning permission to make changes to what's on your property. There are certain rules about like what fencing you're allowed to have for HOAs or different things like this. So, and this is why I said in the global context, it depends on where you are and what does private property mean? Because I would put forth the hypothesis that a lot of times you don't actually own your property truly. It's like you own the right to do certain things with it, but you're not able to do everything that you want. So is that ownership? Is that truly private property? Maybe yes, because of access. See, complicated things and fun things to think about from a city planning perspective. Another user suggests that OP use motion activated sprinkler as soon as you cross the rock. I think that's a brilliant idea. Is dog training, classical conditioning is creating negative associations with going to potty in that yard, and that would get rid of some of the smell. So I think that's a smart idea. Let's see what some of these replies say. The man with 2 poo brains replies to that saying, and the things that make the high-pitched sound. I saw one work very effectively the other day. Little LED turned green. I heard a click, but nothing else, and the dog looked startled and bolted from the path. I think it depends on the type. It doesn't seem to bother, like my dog's ears perk up, but it doesn't seem to bother them too much versus it hurts my head. And another user responds to that saying that those give me a human migraines. I hate that they're becoming popular. And so this is the thing, right? And then sound waves, back to private versus public property. That sound is going past your property, right? Because it doesn't just stop when someone's on your property. The sound is like even when you pass by the yard. So say if that thing's in the yard and you're on the sidewalk, your dog might not even be in somebody's yard, but you're passing by the house and the sound wave happens. Is that neighborly in kind? Because you're infringing on public property at that point. One could argue a similar thing for sprinklers, right? The sprinklers end up on the sidewalk if you have sprinklers in your front yard a lot of the times. Is that being neighborly? I don't know. As a kid, I always liked it in the summer. And so then you time it to either like not get sprayed or to get sprayed, depending on what you wanted. But I could see some people getting up in arms of like, you're the a-hole. Why are you being so disrespectful of letting the sprinklers on the sidewalk? You know, different people have hot buttons for different things. And so interesting. So different people going back and forth with the comments about the smell. Depending on where you live, yeah, when it's hot out in the summer, especially if you have AstroTurf, those things can really smell. Working previously in a dog boarding facility, we'd have to spray things down, and other commenters of other people working in the dog industry have said as much. This user, else09, says, "You're the a-hole. Dude, it's a dog. Pee outside all the time on anything. Usually grass, which will absorb the pee. It's no big deal. Many animals do this. Of course, if the grass is fake or another material that won't absorb, then that sucks. And hopefully you can use natural deterrents or fence that others have suggested. And running outside to yell at the owner just makes you look like a spectacle," as someone else aptly put it. And so this is the thing. I think that probably the a-hole vote for this, at least I hope, is not necessarily for being upset about something happening to your yard, but instead the fact that you're running after this lady and calling her these names and sounding like being a bit aggressive with it. Sometimes you can put your dog's leash as hard as you want and tell them to stop, and it won't matter. They're going to go where they're going to go. I have a dog, and I've succeeded in stopping her from pooping in specific spots but never peeing. If I drag her, the pee drags with her, which I don't think you want on your sidewalk. This was my other thing. I'm very curious what people would actually want, because, like, if we want my dogs to pee on the sidewalk instead, I'm very open to that. And to my point, you could potty your dog in the yard before you go, but that won't necessarily mean that they don't need to continuously go. Do you want dog owners to train their dogs to defecate on the sidewalk instead? I don't think people would be a fan. Again, going back to other dog owners, Patton says, "I'm prepared to get downvoted for this by all the lunatic pet owners out there, but not the a-hole. I do not subscribe to the dog does its own business wherever I can't control it nonsense, because if that's the case, I just assume all these people live in houses full of poop and pee since your dog can't control it right. My city is littered with poop because of pet owners that deserve to treat everyone else's house as a bathroom." I'm assuming they mean the yard, but I don't know. "I have 2 dogs, big high energy breeds, and I taught them to poop before we go for a walk. Amazing what you can do with taking the time to train your animal instead of making everyone else live to your standards." Okay, and again, very curious, and I'd be very open to hearing, because I also have my dogs go poop in the yard. Are these short walks? If you're taking your dog out for like an hour or two long of a jaunt, typically, in my experience, both with my dogs and being a dog walker and things like that, and guys, this is why I really don't appreciate people who don't pick up their dog poop, because I have at times been walking around with like this much dog poop in various bags because I'm picking up after all of the dogs I used to walk when I was a group dog walker. Maybe I need to go talk to some veterinarians, because I can understand directing them to not go in different people's yards, because I do that as well. To teach your dog to hold it, you can. There are service dogs that do that for sure. Task training and working. But then I go back to, then you need another outlet for your dog of like, if you're not going to use your walk as like the sniffari and letting your dog be enriched and explore and be a dog, that's totally fine. It just means you need to find another outlet to do that. A lot of these are assumptions that people have of what their own neighborhood looks like. And a user brings up, there are entire neighborhoods without sidewalks. And Street Carrot 7442 says, "And the dog will just have to figure out where to do their business in a respectful place." This I pose. What is a respectful place? For anyone who's ever traveled to a country with street dogs, the respectful place is they poop where they want, in whatever areas that make sense for them. So I'm very curious, in an urban context in North America, what is your best way about doing that? People going back and forth in the comments. Random Vowel Sound says, "I don't know. I always try to get my dogs to relieve themselves in my own yard before taking them on a walk. It works with one of them, but the other one gets so excited she poops at least 2 or 3 more times during the walk, getting harder to clean up each time," if you know what I mean. Basically, like, the first poop is really solid and it's getting more wet and liquidy as it goes on. "I try to keep her off people's lawns, but then she does it in the street where people are actually walking, and sometimes I can't get it off the pavement." And so this is what I'm curious about, is the idea that we're banning dogs from walking in the neighborhood? If so, are we mandating city planners to create parks closer to urban spaces? And do you want dogs pooping on the sidewalk instead? That is public property. So this is the interesting thing between public and private property, that divide. I'm assuming a lot of times when people say that our dogs go on public property, we're likely talking about trails and forested areas and parks. Makes sense. In the neighborhood setting, public property is the road or the sidewalk. Do you want dog poop and pee on the sidewalk? Because even if owners can mandate and teach their dogs to go in their yard, very possible to do, as the dog exercises the bowel movement, it tricks along. They'll need to go to the bathroom more often. So if you take your dog for a decent walk, not just a 10-minute, if you're taking your dog for an exercise walk, like an hour-long walk, it's very likely they'll need to go to the bathroom again. Do you want that done on the sidewalk? Because in this context, in this present circumstance, that's the alternative. Okay? So then you're just going to have them start and end peeing on the sidewalk. And someone responds saying just that. And now there's a giant puddle of pee on the sidewalk where other people are trying to walk. What do we do now? Get a goldfish, then give it to the closest 10-year-old because you're too incompetent to be trusted with any sort of animal. And see, this is what will happen. People will respond with name calling or saying, then you just shouldn't have a dog. Well, we know how I feel about that and about people prescribing that people should or should not have pets. But this is what happens is people will have a very strong stance on something. But then when you ask them, hey, give me a solution instead, they don't have one. So they just resort to name calling. And so a lot of people are saying, basically just don't walk your dog in the neighborhood then. And people are saying, walk them in an open space or yard. So then again, we are saying in order to have a dog, you need to be either physically located next to these green spaces or have a car. Could one argue that there are certain requisites that would be ideal for a dog's living condition? Absolutely. Could we also agree that this is also the case with humans? Probably so, I would argue. Do most humans or dogs live in the perfect conditions for their quality of life? I would argue no. Does that mean that those humans or dogs should not exist? I don't think I have that determination to say that is so. Some of these Reddit users, that might be a different story. Paranoid Walnut says, my dog will pee if I just take him outside and not on a walk. Yeah, this is the case. And this is what will frequently happen when we potty our dogs in our yards. If he's going on a walk, he might pee in the yard, but he'll also poop or pee along the walk. I don't let him pee on flowers or plants besides grass, and it's always close to the sidewalk. Yep, I agree. Responsible dog ownership to me. The sidewalk is there for a reason, so use it instead of the grass to go back to your house. I can't control where my dog does his business or when. I've never judged someone for letting their dog do the same for my yard. I don't explicitly take him out only to go potty in other people's yards, but it does happen for walks, and if he's further than my property line, I always pick up poop, though, and I feel bad about that. And I think that that's the middle ground that we strike. To me, this seems like the reasonable stance to take, but evidently people have very strong opinions about what should happen in their yards, which is definitely their right. I would argue then it would be hypocritical of them to complain if they step in dog pee or poop smears on the sidewalk, because that is the alternative. In a neighborhood, if you have the right to say dogs shouldn't go in my yard, we'll say private property. You can make that assertion. The alternative is then dog owners have the right to let their dogs use the bathroom in public places, as these people have said. In a neighborhood where the infrastructure is road, sidewalk, people's property, no grass things in between, then the place we're directing our dogs to do the business would be the sidewalk. Alrighty, you heard it here, folks. In 2026, the responsible thing for dog ownership is potentially having your dog go to the bathroom on the sidewalk. But let's move on to the next one. Am I the a-hole for letting my dog poop in my front yard before I go to work? Okay, great. So now we can't let our dogs poop in our own yards either. But we'll see why this is the case. This is from a deleted user, which is never a super great sign, but let's see how this goes. For the last 4 months, I have been put on early shifts, so I start work between 6 and 6 a.m. Because of that, I tie my dog out in my front yard about 30 minutes before I'm due so he can do his business. My dog will bark at passing cars, people, etc. I try to bring him in, but sometimes he goes out for a bit, and that's just life. Don't love the barking at that early hour of the morning, and I'm a big proponent that if your dog is barking, you should just bring them inside. I think especially if you live close to neighbors, if you live in an urban or suburban environment, I don't think that is polite or reasonable. And I know where I live, in my part of the world, there are rules around complaining. You can complain to by law if the dog is barking. I think it's for longer than 10, maybe 15 minutes straight. It's been a second because I've changed cities, but I think it's something like that. I am always, as soon as my dog starts barking in the yard, which if you live in an urban environment and your neighbor dog starts barking, yeah, it's fun times. I just recall my dogs and get them to go inside. OB says that their neighbor's bedroom window backs onto their front yard. They have been knocking on the window and loudly sighing every time my dog barks in the morning. I talked to my neighbor on the other side and they said they are not bothered about it, so I did not do anything to stop the noise because my dog needs to use the toilet and he is on my property. The neighbor tried to talk to me a few times and I just walked away because I really feel they're overreacting and did not wish to argue. The other morning at 6 a.m., when my dog barked, someone called me selfish out the window. I didn't want to confront them right then, so I waited until my daughter was here. They had their bedroom window open around 2 p.m., so I shouted through until they come to it and asked what their problem was. Okay, immediately I'm like, both of these neighbors don't sound like they're not the a-holes. I'm like, put a note on their front porch or something. Like, why are we shouting at people through windows? The neighbors said that they're fed up of waking up at 6 a.m. every day. They work late. The woman said she's had a headache for 2 days straight because of the lack of sleep. And my dog, which sounds like BS, don't love how OP is writing this. And I started thinking of, is there like noise, depending on where you live in the world, sometimes there are like noise curfews of like it's quiet hours between this time in the evening and this time in the morning, and that got me thinking too, like if this was 8 a.m. instead of 6 a.m., is it still an issue? I would say yes, because I think it is rude to let one's dog continue to bark for really any length of time to disturb people. I think if your dog is barking, that is your cue to go get your dog and bring them inside. OP says that they explained that their dog is barking at raccoons that were passing through their neighbor's front yard, and that noise ordinances don't apply in situations where my dog is antagonized. I don't agree with that. Like, it's a extending situation of like, oh, if it happens once, like, but if this is your new routine, I explained they should have more respect as they only rent and we own. I don't like that either. I said they can literally just move if they don't like it because they rent, and the woman laughed. At this point, I said if the woman didn't get away from her window, I was going to come over there. The woman responded by laughing again, telling me to come over and calling me a fat B word. Don't love this. All of the people in this story just do not sound like lovely humans that are understanding of one another. But a lot of friction comes from neighborhoods and dogs, and I think why a lot of people don't like dogs is inconveniencing them in their life. And this is a hard one. Because on the one hand, we could say private property. I can understand why you would not want a dog to disturb your private property. I think that it can be somewhat of a challenge when we are so unwilling to be empathetic towards others and their situation. Unfortunately, living in society with other humans means being inconvenienced by people. The degree to which can vary. And one could argue, oh, like, in my home, I don't deserve to be inconvenienced by people. And it's an interesting thing because we could see with the dog here, and that's a very direct situation, right? That's a very like, this one individual is letting their one dog pee on my property and I'm not a fan. When it comes to the barking, then this is multiple individuals that one is disturbing. What happens with construction? And we could say like, oh, construction company is one thing. If you're doing construction on your house, you're inconveniencing your neighbors due to noise, right? Does someone have more of a right to inconvenience due to noise with construction than they do for the dog? Maybe one can argue, oh, the construction is theoretically a shorter lived project than a dog's life expectancy, and if they continue this behavior, if you live near school, you're gonna hear kids screaming and laughing and having a good time and noise. Some people are fine with that. Some people find that annoying. So it's always interesting in these stories because I'm like, how much does it bother you, and do you extend this to other areas or only in certain instances? Is it a general unwillingness to deal with the inconvenience of living near other people? Or is it just like the dog that's bothering you? If so, is it just because you don't like dogs? Back to the story. This morning, OP called their landlord, and the landlord was very rude, didn't care about the tenant insulting or harassing us. They were very unhelpful and refused to do anything about the situation, so I'm looking to legal options to get them, to force them to do something. So after OP was called this mean word from their neighbor, they say, at this point, I called the cops because they were harassing us. I could call it mutual harassment. I could hear them sitting on the bed talking about us when I was on the phone. The cops spoke to them first for some reason, even though they should have come here first because we were the ones that complained. I'm annoyed because the cop didn't say anything to them about insulting us and instead issued us a warning for violating noise ordinances and said we could be fined. He would not listen to anything I said and seemed uninterested. Yeah. And this is the other thing too. And this, as dog owners should be aware, I try to have an overabundance of caution when it comes to my dogs and what they do, because even if the thing is, like, the dog is always going to be like the victim in these kinds of situations. If you have a, like, my dog is barking versus yeah, and we could all see this outcome from reading the story, right? Barking dog, it won't matter. Your neighbors could be like throwing a party in their backyard, and banging trash cans against the thing, and your barking dog would probably still be the one found at fault. I'm not saying that it's right or reasonable, but it's just more likely what is going to happen. And unfortunately, as dog owners, we need to, like, safeguard our dogs against other people. In this case, I think OP deserves the tag of a-hole, but just as a general PSA for dog owners, of especially if you're dealing with neighbor complaints, even if your dog is not in the wrong, just pretend like they are and mitigate, because you and your dog are gonna get the brunt of it if it comes down to bylaws or getting the police involved or different things like that. The person with the dog is automatically going to be kind of like on the back foot, on the defensive, just because of dogs having less rights than humans do. So even if the neighbors were inciting it, your dog is still likely going to be blamed, so train your dog accordingly. This morning, I called their landlord, and the landlord was very rude. Again, didn't care about their tenant insulting me or harassing us. They were really unhelpful and refused to do anything about the situation. So I'm looking into legal options to force them to do something. I don't know how to let my dog use the toilet anymore. There was no reason for the woman who wasn't American to insult me. This is also like, this guy, irrespective of letting the dog in the yard or not, just seems quite bigoted. So they're just going to be the a-hole no matter what, just from how they've written the story. But the cop said because they were in their home, they can't tell them to move from the room. And we'll do the edit and then we'll get into the comments. Edit says, wow, okay, I get I'm the a-hole. But for the record, my dog does not bark for 30 minutes, sometimes only a few minutes. I'm not tying him outside for now. Also, I got the landlord's number from the listing before anyone rented the place for issues exactly like this. I think everyone is the a-hole here. Me for the dog and her for insulting me. Stop commenting. Yeah, it's so tough. I think as soon as your dog barks, you need to bring them inside, because that is the polite thing. Even if we have like the 10-15 minute like grace window for like bylaw ordinances, it's just polite to not let your dog bark. And especially, like, I am always on guard for, even like middle of the night, rats in the yard, dog hunting or barking at a rat. I'm like, nope, inside you go, just because you don't want to disturb people. And yes, is it inconvenient for as dog owners? Of like, okay, now I have to walk my dog in the neighborhood and let them poop on the sidewalk instead, or something like this. But we do what we have to do because we took on the responsibility of those beings. We'll do a quick overview of some of these comments. Hermione Loves Milo says, you're the a-hole. This title is pretty misleading. They don't care that your dog is pooping in your yard. They think you're the a-hole because you're letting your dog bark at 6 a.m. in your front yard. Worse, you won't even talk to them about it. You're definitely the a-hole neighbor. In my experience, having a dog tied up can make them more reactive than if they are loose in a fence yard. Yep, this is absolutely true. Take your dog on a quick walk instead and apologize to your neighbors. Yeah, and I think that's a great solution here, is getting ready for work in the morning, and especially that early in the morning. I would just take the dog for a lap in the neighborhood if that's feasible. One user says, you're the a-hole. Bad dog owner. Bad dog owner. Depressive Darkling says, you're the a-hole. Here's the fix for your situation. Walk your dog in the morning. Of course he's going to bark. He's tied up and bored AF. Give your dog a lap around the block and take different routes to break up the routine. Love that. Walking will fix the noise and will give your dog stimulation and exercise. Yeah, especially since it sounds like the dog's barking at raccoons. So reactive to stimuli likely due to boredom as well. Mine goes for a walk 3 times a day, 4 if I get bored and it's not too humid cold outside at the time. Walking your dog will fix 90% of your problems. Just work it into your wake-up routine. Give him another when you get home from work and one last before bedtime. Start considering your neighbors a little. No one likes hearing dogs go crazy at any time during the day, and 6 a.m. is really early for night workers, and I would just argue many people in general. A lot of people, unless they're morning people, don't get up at 6 a.m. unless they have to. My boyfriend doesn't get off until 1 or 2 a.m., and if you're my neighbor, I'd be very upset at only getting 2 or 3 hours of sleep before your yapper went off every day. Give the woman a break. You're in the wrong here. She is the a-hole for calling you fat and all, but you started that interaction by yelling at her through the window. Yeah, agreed. Please just walk your dog. You'd be surprised at how much your mood and your dog's behavior will improve by that simple change in routine. Just make sure that you clean up after him because it's not cool to leave it in your neighbor's yard. Hell, even walking the dog around your own yard will help with this issue. Yeah, that's the other thing. Especially if the yard isn't fenced and that's why the OP is tying up the dog in the yard, you could just take the dog for a walk in your own yard. And that makes it really easy to bring your dog inside if they start barking at raccoons or whatever. Yeah. And most of these are kind of repeating these sentiments. Next up, greedy emu. Love that. 4631 says, am I the a-hole? Fuss about dog poop in the yard. This is a throwaway account. I don't like going to my sister's house. She has 2 large dogs and I don't like dogs. Very valid. And I always, for people who don't like dogs or allergic to dogs or don't even have dogs, I always give my friends the option of like, we don't need to hang out at my house. I can meet you at a restaurant and eat, or I can go to your house. Like, I never force people to interact with my dogs. Mostly also because I don't want to force my dogs to interact with people who don't like them either. And then I'm worried about things that I'm not worried about for people who do like dogs. And that's just also the compromise you make. For instance, I don't leave my dogs home alone above 5 hours if there's like traffic and I like can't avoid it max. Especially since studies have shown that long term leaving dogs alone can increase rates of depression in dogs and it affects their mood. So if we're not having to hang out at my house and I'm going to your house or going out to eat, totally cool. We just know that this is like the 4-hour window we have to hang out because I have to get back to the dogs. And I feel like that's a very reasonable compromise. But yeah, so this OP, her sister has dogs. She doesn't like dogs. The sister hosted a party for her 4-year-old daughter. Most of the extended family went. I went with my wife, my 4-year-old, and a 15-month-old. So their youngest is a bit over a year. Right away, the kids went to play and run around in the backyard. They had a themed step and repeat, but otherwise it was just a grassy area. The dogs were locked away, mostly because of me, I'm pretty sure. It took all of 2 minutes for my daughter to step in dog poop. Got all over her shoes and pants. I'm assuming this is like the little kid thing where they're like running around and she fell in dog poop because I'm like, that's a really big dog. She stepped in dog poop and it got all over both her shoes and her pants. After cleaning up, I privately complained to my sister about the dog poop she left in the yard. She basically dismissed me and said it wasn't a big deal. She basically said I should have been watching my daughter and blamed my daughter for stepping in dog poop. I guess expecting a cleaned up environment where many kids under the age of 5 will be is too much to ask. I was upset and we left before even eating. Somehow this is being turned around on me that I'm the a-hole for complaining and leaving early. Am I the a-hole? No, I don't think you are the a-hole. I think it is very reasonable to expect a yard to be cleaned up of dog poop as much as possible if you're hosting any sort of party or event in a yard. Like if this were me, and I obviously have dogs, I would not even host the party at my place. Well, just because as dogs and kids, you always need to monitor the reaction between dogs and children. Just because so many things can go wrong. Like, even if the dog is the most docile ever, a lot of kids don't know how to interact with dogs well. They can get spooked. I would never put my dogs in a situation where they could be blamed by somebody for something that they did or did not do. Because a lot of people don't know dog body language very well. Kids are easily spooked, as I said, depending on the situation. So I would just never have had the party in my place, given that I have dogs. For this kind of party, I just we go to Crash Crawlies or something like that. But I know that not everyone has access to the inside play parks for kids, depending on where they are. So in this case, you have to have the event at your house, the sister who has kids and the dogs. You have to do a poop pickup. If it's hard for you to do yourself, there are services that you can hire to pick up the poop. So that's an option as well. And then obviously you just can't let your dogs go poop in the yard after the poop pick is done. So extra walking or something like that. So it is a lot. Is it a lot more inconvenience and effort? Yeah. But this is part of the deal that you kind of sign up for when hosting. It's one of the reasons why I don't love hosting. Not that I don't pick up dog poop or things like that, but just it's a lot of effort. If you're going to be a good and gracious host, there's a lot that goes into it besides just letting people into your space. Additional cleaning and setup, and especially if you have dogs in the scenario or children in the scenario, there's just a lot more factors and management that needs to be in place in order for this to be safe. But we'll see what people said. I don't know how to pronounce this, but this commenter says, not the a-hole. If you're hosting, you should make sure that the environment is clean and safe. That's the bare minimum. I would agree. This other user says, not the a-hole. She was embarrassed and tried to turn it around on you. And she's definitely the a-hole here. She should have cleaned the yard before the party or made a general announcement for everyone to watch the kiddos in the backyard. Doggy bombs are everywhere. Of course, you went home early. Your daughter was most likely upset. You both probably smelled terrible and desperately needed to take hot baths, showers with good old-fashioned soap. The last thing you want is sick kids from dog poop. You did the right thing. Don't feel guilty at all. There's some people are referencing the a-hole comments. I haven't seen any of those before. Educational Wild 202 says, not the a-hole. She might have cleaned up before the party but missed one, or dogs did their business after she cleaned up and she didn't notice, but her reaction to your daughter being the one to tread in it suggests she didn't even try to have it clean. It's not acceptable for any gathering, much less one where there's multiple kids running about. As for leaving early, what were you meant to do? Have your kid running around in poop shoes and pants, half-dressed, bare feet, and potentially having another incident? I'd have left and wouldn't be back either. Molotov Merkin says, not the a-hole. I am a dog person and have kept dogs for a long time. I always make sure my yard is scooped well before people come over. It's poor manners not to. I'd be mortified if anyone, let alone a child, stepped in poop while in my yard. I would agree. I'm going to keep scrolling till I find out everyone sucks here, just because I agree with the comments we've read so far, and I just want to see if there is differing opinions. Specialist Owl says, everyone sucks here. On one hand, yeah, I get being mad that your child got covered in dog poop. I'm guessing she tripped after stepping in it while running. That's the only way I can think of it getting on her pants. Yeah, that was my thought too. And for those that don't know, I worked with kids for 10 years before I worked with dogs. So I maybe have a different perspective than a lot of people, because I love dogs and I love kids. So frequently I always come from a place of how can I make it the safest for all the parties involved? But for people who don't like kids or don't like dogs, they might have a different opinion than I do when it comes to situations where theoretically we are pitting the dogs against the children. Yeah, so Specialist Owl 2660 continues saying, I'd also get being annoyed at your sister's less than sympathetic response. Normally a dog owner would apologize instantly. I agree. Dog poop may still be in your yard. Being outraged is sort of an overreaction. Kids trip, kids get dirty, and as a parent, you've got to deal with it sometimes, and sometimes it's gross. You're sort of the a-hole for being mad at something happening that could literally happen to anyone, and she is an a-hole for not being empathetic to being partially responsible for an accident and not just apologizing. Apologize to each other and move on. This commenter is like me, where it's oh, if we lived in a perfect world where people were just nice and understanding to one another, that is what would happen. But unfortunately, we don't live in a world where people are often kind and empathetic to one another. So That's not the story we're reading today. Another commenter responds to that comment saying, yeah, growing up, our yard was a fenced in acre, and they generally stuck to a far off corner to do their business. But learning to look out for poop was pretty much learned when learning to walk, lol. Granted, it was on a ranch, so lots of poop. Never stopped anyone from coming to pool parties, though. I get him being annoyed, but I think that this reaction stems from having to be somewhere with gasp dogs. And this is the other interesting thing for me. And this is why, like, other stories was in like a suburban environment, and depending on what country and where you're living in that country, there is a rural and urban divide a lot of times when it comes to ideas around like what spaces are for folks that have grown up with a lot of animals, maybe a farming background, things like that. You do just look before you step. And yeah, to this point of, and this is where we're making an exception for dogs, right? We're saying like, oh, if you're hanging out in a dog's yard, a yard with dogs, we're expecting that to be clean and devoid of poop. If you went to a farm and had like a kid's birthday party with a farm and horses, what would you tell the kids? You would tell the kids like, watch out for the horse poop. Like, don't step in the horse poop. Will we be mad at the horses for pooping, and then there would be the horse poop? And so this is just what I mean. I'm not saying one is like right or another, but just pointing out that like this is where the cognitive dissonance between these things can occur and where these difference of opinions can occur. But let's see. I'm scared to open the replies to this. Yeah, oh no. That person was like, yeah, I agree with this take. Yes. Girthy Squirrel Bit says, next time, tell your sister that every pile you find in the backyard will promptly be flung at their house. And so this is, it's funny because people will say, nutty dog owners think, this behavior is clearly not acceptable. Why they're letting their dogs do this? But there's also like a lot of dog haters out there that also have unreasonable reactions to dogs just existing. And like that previous user, would it be so nice if people could just say, oh, we can just agree to disagree? And I'm just going to give you grace. I think what you're doing is wrong. You think what I'm doing is wrong, but we're going to be adults and exist in society together because we wouldn't choose each other as neighbors, but we're stuck here and we'll just comport ourselves accordingly. But very rarely do people behave like that. Yeah, and a lot of people are saying like, yeah, having dogs, but if you're hosting people over, then pick up the dog poop in the yard if you're having the party in the yard. And I think that's reasonable. I think that is what you do. I would add the added layer of pick up all the poop before people go over. But if I'm a party guest and I'm going to someone's house in a yard specifically that has dogs, I'm also just like watching where I'm stepping. But I also acknowledge I grew up and currently live in the Pacific Northwest, and like you watch out so you don't step in bear poop or like horse poop on trails and things like that too, or like just like gross things, slimy seaweed, fungi, whatever. But I could see if somebody has spent most of their life in a very like sanitized urban environment, like maybe they don't go into the wilderness. Maybe they're like their only frame of reference is like sidewalks and cars and rows and manicured lawns, that they might not have that frame of reference to even consider the fact that there might be gross things to not step on. Those are our 5 poop-filled stories for this week. Who would have thought that poop was so contentious? I'm sure that you guys will be in the comments telling me that I'm wrong on something. I very much so am open to feedback. What I ask is, if I am incorrect, please provide me with an alternative solution. This is not to say that your stance or assertion is incorrect if you don't have one, but if you just tell me, hey, you are wrong, and don't provide me an alternative, then I cannot share that alternative with the others in my world, both privately and publicly. But that's it for this week. If you want to submit your own dog stories, the link, as always, is in the show notes, and I will see you next time. Give your dog some scritches for me.